Sati Center and IMC are very happy to welcome today Guy Armstrong. Guy Armstrong has been practicing insight meditation for over 30 years. His training included a year as a Buddhist monk in Thailand, primarily with Ajahn Buddhadasa. He began teaching in 1984 and has led retreats in the US, Europe, and Australia. Guy is a stewarding teacher at Spirit Rock and a guiding teacher of Insight Meditation Society. He is the author of Emptiness, a Practical Guide for Meditators.
Thanks, Marianne. So good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. I thought I'd introduce myself a little bit more because we're talking about lineages this morning. So I want to give you a sense of where I'm situated within the lineages within our overall tradition. So I need to update that bio. It's been 40 years since actually it's closer to 50, but don't tell anybody. I should be further along. 50 years of practice, and now it's about 40 years of teaching. So just to update that. So I started off extended retreat practice at IMS in Barre, Massachusetts, considered the mothership of the Vipassana community. It's okay? Yeah. From which a lot else has sprung. So I was a meditator there in 1977, went on staff in 78 and 79. And in my first retreat, I was at Lama Foundation in New Mexico, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg. And in the evening, Jack did these really beautiful chants from the Thai tradition. They were in Pali. But they'd done a lot of chanting at Ajahn Chah's, which is where he had studied. And I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd heard. These Pali chants, looking out big window over the space, the mountains, and moon rising. And so I had an interview with Jack, and I went and said, Jack, I really love what you're doing with the chanting. I think I want to be a monk in Thailand. And he said, well, that's a great idea, but before you go there, come spend a couple of years at the meditation center that we just started in Massachusetts. Otherwise, if you get to Thailand, you're going to be lost because the teachings are a little hard to get clearly. So he said, come to IMS for a couple of years. It had just opened that year in 76. So that's what I did. I went and did a long retreat, and then I went on staff for a couple of years, and then I went over to Thailand in 1982 and ordained, and that's when I spent the time with Ajahn Buddhadasa. But my time at IMS was really a grounding in a Burmese lineage, which we'll get into and talk about. And then being in Thailand, I got exposed to the Thai forest tradition. And so I absorbed that. And then I came home after a year in the monkhood. External circumstances drew me home, but my monk's karma wasn't finished. I could still feel that longing. So I went back and spent another 6-week period in Burma with Pa Auk Sayadaw, who allowed me to ordain on a temporary basis and practice with him. So in this morning's presentation, I want to talk about the Burmese influence with both Mahasi Sayadaw and Pa Auk Sayadaw, and also the Thai forest influence. I feel very connected to all those lineages. So that's our start of our material for the presentation. I am a guiding teacher still at IMS, and I was a guiding teacher for years at Spirit Rock, but I moved off from that role years ago. So I'm most connected with IMS, and I know it the best. So when I talk about lineages, I'm going to talk largely from the perspective of IMS and what's done there, which has a lot of commonality with Spirit Rock and a lot of commonality with here, IMC and IRC. But if some things aren't exactly congruent, I'm going to go with the IMS version of the truth. And also I should warn you that I have a lot of opinions on this stuff. And I'll try to be largely factual, but I'm also going to put out opinions because that's what I like to do. So with that, let's see if our high tech is working and begin with the presentation with the slides. And please feel free to move to a chair where you can see the screen clearly. Can you all read? Feel free to move over to be more central if that will help. Are the letters and everything clear enough from where you're sitting you can read? Okay, good. So from my point of view, lineage really means our Dharma ancestors. Because the way the Dharma has come down to us is from a living tradition. It's one of the things that's pretty amazing is the Buddha died almost 2,600 years ago. And yet we have still got access to what I can see is the full range of his teachings that lead to liberation. If one wants to become liberated in this life, we have a record of how to do that. And that's only because we have had Dharma ancestors who have received the teachings, embodied the teachings, and passed them on generation after generation so that we have access to them today. Now, when you have physical ancestors, genealogical ancestors, you inherit their DNA, right? We look the way we look, and sometimes we think the way we think based on our ancestors, what we have inherited knowingly or unknowingly for them. The same's true in the Dharma world. We inherit a lot of the attitudes, the practices, the understandings, and the views of our Dharma ancestors in ways that are both conscious and unconscious. So I want to talk about this. And to the extent that you feel your practice is for the benefit of all beings, and I know a number of you do, we also want to carry those teachings forward in an authentic way. So I'm curious, in this group, do any of you have some teaching responsibilities? Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, some are in overt teaching modes, and the rest of us teach subconsciously, right? By our beings in the world. We are all expressing our understanding of the Dharma. In the IMS model from the guiding teachers, the GT stands for guiding teachers, our view is that we want our retreats to convey the full liberative power of what the Buddha offered. So we want to be able to point people who are interested all the way to full liberation. So we want the retreats to carry that message and that possibility. First ancestor, the Buddha. And I put this photo up for a little bit of shock value. Because most of the time we see the Buddha as a very handsome, noble, dignified being, exuding peace, calm, and loving kindness. This shot is what we call the emaciated Buddha, which was at a different stage of his practice. This was actually not long before, in his practice history, not long before he became the Buddha. He had done severe ascetic practices for a long time, to the point where he was eating just 1 grain of rice a week. And he said when he touched his belly, he could feel his backbone. And that's just an indicator of the passion that he brought to his quest for liberation. He really wanted to be free, and he was willing to do anything to achieve it. Fortunately for us, he came to decide that those practices really weren't necessary. In fact, they were unhelpful. So after going through this period of real emaciation, he decided to try some food. He ate for a change. He started feeling better, he felt stronger, and it was at that point that he moved in the area that's what's now called Bodh Gaya. And he sat under the famous tree, resolved not to get up until he had discovered what he was looking for, which was full liberation, and found it that night, meditation under the Bodhi tree. That tree is still there. I think it's a few generations on. So I don't think the same tree has lived for 2,600 years, but a few generations on. And you can still go visit it. It's a very holy site, one of the holy sites in India. So he practiced to full awakening, and then he left us instructions how to follow the path that he had discovered. And I'm sure you're familiar with these, with the Four Noble Truths, the truth of dukkha, the source of dukkha, and the end of dukkha in what he called nibbana, the full release. As far as I know, this term nibbana is only used in the Pali Suttas, the record we have of the Buddha's teachings, to refer to a fully awakened being. So later tradition pulled it out and used it to mean something like the deathless element, an element that any of us can touch and realize at any moment. It's ever present, so to say. But in the Pali discourses, the way the Buddha used the term, as far as I know, he used it in connection with a fully awakened being who had come to the total end of suffering. So the first three noble truths are these, and then the Eightfold Path is the fourth, comprised of virtue, meditation, and wisdom. They roll off very naturally in the Pali, sila, samadhi, panya, fewer syllables. And I find it really interesting here that when the Buddha wanted a term for meditation, he didn't use sati. He didn't use mindfulness, which is what most of us think of as meditation. He pointed to the term samadhi, which we often translate as concentration, unification of mind, collectedness. Because these are sequential, the understanding is that sila, ethical conduct, is the foundation for the mind to collect, to become calm, and the development of samadhi. Without sila, the mind can't properly collect. And then samadhi is the basis for wisdom to arise. And when the Buddha talks about wisdom, he's talking about liberating insight. Generally into the three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self, or the insight into the deathless element, or nibbana. That's what's considered insight in the classical teachings in our tradition. Wisdom is really the purpose of the Eightfold Path, because that's what liberates, but the sila and samadhi are the foundations, necessary foundations. And then the Buddha also taught quite a lot on karma and rebirth, understanding that the birth we're in right now is only one among many, many, many that we have lived throughout time, and we will live in the future. So this teaching of rebirth was very central to what he had to share. You know, he said, I haven't taught you everything I know. I've only taught a handful of leaves. So he was standing in the middle of the forest, he picked up a handful of leaves. He asked those around him, which is bigger, the leaves in my hand or all the leaves in the forest? And those people, being no fool, said, the leaves in the forest, Venerable Sir. He said, what I know is like the leaves in all the forest, and what I have shared is just this handful of leaves. But he shared what was needed for people to come to awakening. So among these handful of leaves, very selected teachings were the teachings on karma and rebirth. These are not always so comfortable for Western students to relate to. They're not part of Western culture. If one was raised Christian, as I was, the understanding is that after death one would go to heaven or hell, and that would be it. And in yogic traditions, there are other meanings of the term rebirth. What the Buddha said is that we can be born in one of a number of realms. After this human realm, we could be born in realms with more suffering or realms with less suffering. So there are something like 25 realms higher than the human realm, which have much greater states of happiness and ease, and 5 lower realms that have greater states of unhappiness, suffering. So we're in a good place. All of you having discovered meditation, I regard as being in a very good place in the human realm. But this is just one possibility. So this concept of realms is also not commonly accepted in the West, and is not easily adopted as a view in the West. But all these things that are on this slide are aspects of what the Buddha called right view. And I'll just read a section from the Majjhima that says this. This is Majjhima 117, called the Great 40. And the Buddha's asked, what is right view? And he says right view is twofold. There's one view that's supramundane, or you could say beyond the world, and that is the view that leads to nibbana, or the experience of nibbana, the end of suffering, beyond worldly conditions. But there's another view that is, he says, affected by the taints, meaning it hasn't gone beyond attachment, but it's still, meaning it's connected with the world, but it's still right view. And here's his definition of that. There is what is given and what is offered and what is sacrificed. Here he's talking about the practice of dāna, of generosity. There is fruit and result of good and bad actions. And this is a teaching of karma. Well, whatever actions we do through body, speech, and mind, if they're from a wholesome intention, they'll have a wholesome fruit. If they're from an unwholesome intention, they'll have a fruit that leads to suffering. Which is why it's so important to stay in touch with intentions. There is this world and the other world. This is the pointing to realms. When the Buddha talked about this world, he means this earth, this human realm, and the animal realm, and the other world. So he's pointing to different realms that we don't see or generally experience from this realm. There is mother and father. I think we can relate to that. There are beings who are reborn spontaneously. So mother and father were necessary for us to come into existence, but in other realms, beings appear spontaneously without parents, part of the Buddha's right view. There are in the world good and virtuous Brahmins and recluses who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. In other words, the Buddha's not just making this stuff up. This is from his direct experience, his personal knowledge. So, karma, rebirth, and realms are all part of his knowledge, his direct knowledge, and they're part of this handful of leaves that he thought was important for us to understand. So, in the West, some people believe in karma, some don't. Some believe in rebirth, some don't. Some believe in the possibility of other realms, some don't. So I personally don't, there's an opinion, I don't think it's necessary that you believe in these three things. But there's a reason that the Buddha put them in his handful of leaves, and he talked about them over and over. So I wonder what purpose they serve us today. Do you think, as you think into these teachings, might it encourage us to lead better lives? The essence of the teaching on karma is something he saw the night of his enlightenment. He said with his divine eye, he could see beings dying and reappearing in a new birth, reappearing according to the lives they had lived before. Those who had lived wholesome lives then were born in wholesome circumstances, happy circumstances. So this is how I understand this particular teaching. Very helpful to consider how our actions might affect our future, not just in this life, but forever. Okay, so these are all aspects of right view. And to the extent that we are in a position to take in all the Buddha's teachings, and for some of us to pass on the Buddha's teachings, it'd be good to consider this. He considered it important. So let's go into specifics. So we are, I think I can say, in this center at IMS, and for the most part at Spirit Rock, practicing what's called the Theravadan school. This is one of the schools that has been in Buddhism for a long time. After the Buddha's death, over the next, say, 400 years, people were practicing with the teachings a lot, and 18 different schools emerged in that time. So I'm going to go into some detail on the history because it really affects our lineage, which is the Theravadan. So one of the schools that emerged from that early period was the Theravadan, but it was not the only school. There were other schools, you may have heard of other schools, Sarvastivadin, Sautrantika. My favorite one is the Pugalavadan, and there were 15 others as well back in that time. This is the school that eventually migrated to Sri Lanka and then continued in an unbroken way to the current time. The other schools all died out. Why that happened, I'm sure you could look up historical reasons. Some of them were very influential, actually, in the kind of Buddhism that went north into Tibet and China. But the one that stayed alive based on the Buddha's teachings is the Theravadan. So our school is based in early Buddhism. And early Buddhism we could call the first 200 years after the Buddha's death. And this school regards the Pali texts, the suttas, and the Vinaya as authoritative. So you've probably heard of different Nikayas: Majjhima Nikaya, Digha Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, Khuddaka Nikaya. Those are the records of the Buddha's teachings that have come down to us. So for me, it's really interesting how they came down. So the story is, after the Buddha's death, there was an assemblage of practitioners, probably monks at that time, who met to recite to one another all the teachings they could recall of the Buddhas. They gathered these texts together, and some organization took place then, and decided to pass them on through memory. In English today, these texts in translation add up to about 2,000 pages. And they've come down to us in this language called Pali, which is an ancient Indian language. It's not spoken today. They're very similar to Sanskrit, but not identical. They've come down in Pali. Those are still available today. You can go online in Sutra Central and read them all in the original Pali. And they've all now been translated into English. All the teachings of the Buddha, as best they were collected right after his death, are available for us today in English and in very good translations. Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations are excellent. Thanissaro Bhikkhu has also done a lot of translations. The Bhikkhu Sujato on Sutta Central has done a lot, and others. So you can read them all. Now, the question may come up, and speaking of questions, if at any point during the day you have questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand. Because if we don't make this interactive, you'll probably go to sleep about 10 o'clock. So let's keep it fresh, and please speak up if there's anything that's on your mind. So the question has to arise, how reliable is this a representation of what the Buddha taught? I think this is a fundamental question in lineages. How much confidence can we have in the words that are around today as representing what the Buddha taught 2,600 years ago? So first they were memorized. They were memorized for 400 years before any were written down. Sometimes people think, oh, there wasn't writing in the time of the Buddha. That's not accurate. There was writing, but it was mostly used for bookkeeping. So, lords would keep track of how many bushels of rice the peasants had given them for their royal protection, for their service. And how many donations the royals made to support spiritual life. They would keep track of things like that. But they didn't write down sacred texts. And you might say that this was an outgrowth of the Vedic system. The Vedas had been alive in ancient India for a long time, and they were not written down. They were passed from generation to generation orally, by memory. So there was in ancient India this tradition of memorization that had held for a long time. So the understanding is that it's called the First Buddhist Council, held shortly after the Buddha's death. The monks came together and recited all the suttas they could recall, and then they divided into different groups and charged each group with the responsibility for remembering a certain section of the teachings. And then that division of labor was passed down over centuries. And it was only 400 years later that they were written down, and that happened in Sri Lanka. And I think what happened is that people started to get worried that some of the fragments, some of the sections of the canon were not being well enough taken care of. Maybe there were a dwindling number of reciters who could remember the whole thing. So they said, we better write them down, so they started to. So the written text only started from that time. And then you might ask yourself, well, how reliable is it that people could memorize 2,000 pages of Pali language, which is not their native tongue by any means? So in case you think this is impossible, there are still people in Burma doing this today. There's a kind of contest that happens in a central monastery. Monks will take it upon themselves to memorize the whole of the Pali Suttas. And then they will come to a contest and be tested. And so the way the test works is the organizers will call up a monk and say, okay, I want you to recite the sutta that is found as number 117 in the Majjhima Nikaya. I want you to recite the whole thing in Pali. And that monk will go, ba 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 ba, and recite the whole thing. So there are people in Burma today who have memorized the entire body of the Pali discourses. So I think it is possible for sure. Now the other thing that's interesting is the Pali texts went down to Sri Lanka. That's where they eventually got written down. But another group of texts, all these early schools, the Sarvastivadins and the Sautrantikas and all those people, had their own body of the canon. The Pali canon was just one. They all had their own, mostly they were written down in Sanskrit. So the Sanskrit texts went around on the Silk Road, went over the northwest of Kashmir, over the Silk Road, and into Tibetan China. A number of those Sanskrit texts landed in China just when Buddhism was hitting China. I don't know the years exactly, but probably about 300 AD, 400 AD maybe. And the Chinese took that body of text, translated them from Sanskrit into Chinese, and preserved those copies up to today. Those sets, whereas the Pali ones are called the Nikayas, the Sanskrit ones that moved into Chinese are called the Agamas, so referred to as the Chinese Agamas, are still available today. So, wouldn't it be interesting what's in the Chinese text and compare it to what's in the Pali text and see how similar they are? Because they diverged probably 2,000 years ago, maybe longer. So, fortunately, somebody has done this. And the person who spent the most time at it that I know of is Bhikkhu Analayo. He's amazing with languages. So he grew up on the Pali, and then he learned Sanskrit, and then he learned Chinese, and then he learned Tibetan. And that's not all. He also speaks fluent Italian and German. He was raised in Germany. So he's kind of a lingua master. So he has done a deep study of comparison between what's in the Pali Suttas and what's in the Chinese Agamas to see how similar they are. Because if they were very different, you might think, oh, all kinds of stuff has been made up in the intervening 2,000 years, all kinds of stuff has been made up. But what's interesting in his finding, and he's written whole books on this, so you can read the details, they are mostly in agreement. And the disagreements that are there are quite minor. And that gives him a lot of confidence that the basic teachings of the Buddha have come down to us in a complete and reasonably accurate form. And I want to give my own take on this, because I think what complete means is that it is a full and reliable path to enlightenment that is laid out in the Pali Suttas and the Chinese Agamas. Full path and workable, reliable enough to lead to enlightenment. So my own take on the reliability is very high. I have a very high trust in the Pali Suttas. So I've read in English translation all the words of the Buddha that are available in the Sutta Pitaka. And I find it about 95% believable. There's about 5% that I don't believe. And I think there's stuff in there that's cultural, saying that Mount Meru is the center of the universe is one example. Another example you can find in the Pali text, a sutta where the Buddha says, no woman can be a Buddha. I don't believe that. So again, Venerable Analayo to the rescue. He searched in the Chinese, the Agamas, it doesn't have that sutta. Or it has the sutta, but it doesn't have that statement. So one of his criteria for believability is that it shows up in both the Pali and the Chinese. And if it shows up in both places, that gives him more confidence that it's a reliable statement of the Buddha's. So for myself, I feel in reading the Pali Suttas, which is what I've read in translation, we have to use our own judgment about what's believable. And to me, the things that are outside what I consider believable are cultural references. But when the Buddha is talking about the Dhamma and what liberates, I haven't found any mistakes. Wouldn't you think reading 2,000 pages by the same person that he might make a slip? And you'd say, well, what you said in 1974 is different from what you said in 2005. So which is it? I don't see any differences. I don't find any internal contradictions. I haven't found anywhere where he says something opposite to what he was recorded as having said at another time. That to me gives a lot of basis for faith. And these texts cover very, very sophisticated and you could say esoteric areas. So, as an example, take the formless attainments. Okay, jhanas are good meditation practice. The first 4 jhanas are called the form jhanas. They're mainly related to experiences in the body. And on the basis of the 4th jhana, body-oriented, rupa jhana, the Buddha described 4 higher states that he called the formless attainments. Deeper states of concentration than the 4 jhanas. And these are things like boundless space, boundless consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. So very, very subtle states. I teach about some aspects of these states, and in order to come to confidence and clarity myself, I go back to read what the Buddha said about them, because I regard that as reliable. You'll find modern commentators saying different things about all of those. Jhana systems vary. I don't know if you all have looked into this, but there are a few major jhana systems at play in the Vipassana world today, and they all have really different definitions of what constitutes even the first jhana. So once we get into even the form jhanas, people have different takes on what's valid. So leaving alone, what about when we get into the what are commonly called the formless jhanas? These are very, very refined states. So I've gone back to read about what the Buddha said about these higher states, because I teach on some of them. Don't find any contradiction. Consistency of explanation and description. And this is true through all kinds of subtle meditative states of mind. The language is very consistent. Descriptions are not in conflict. And that's really what's given me the faith that I have, that As I say, my estimation, 95% of the Pali Canon is really reliable, especially the parts that have to do with Dharma and liberation. Cultural things, I won't touch. But the liberation teachings, pretty accurate. Okay, so the Theravadan school has lived on and off, actually. It's come and gone a bit. But it's lived in Sri Lanka over all these centuries, and it has lived in Burma and Thailand for most of them. It's kind of come and gone at times from Burma and Thailand. So this is where our Dharma ancestors are today, and this is where the teachings have come to us from. These three countries, Sri Lanka and then Southeast Asia. Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos have a little bit of this, but they also have a lot of influence from Zen and Northern schools. So these three countries are primarily Theravadan. The slide before, remember we talked about right view. It consisted of Four Noble Truths, karma, rebirth, and realms. All our Asian ancestors that I'm aware of hold this as right view. So the teaching that have come down to me, the teachings that have come down to IMS from Asia, all those teachers express this view. And we'll talk about those teachers in a minute. So many of the schools within Theravada also embrace the Abhidhamma and the Visuddhimagga. And you've probably heard of these books. Abhidhamma literally means higher Dhamma. And it's an amazing work. It was considered, again, I'm relying on Venerable Analayo for this, it was considered to have been put together about 250 years after the death of the Buddha. Now, many Asian schools say that, no, the Buddha taught it during his lifetime. It was so long he couldn't teach it all at once, but he went up and taught it to his mother who was in one of the higher heaven realms. She'd passed away. And then he delivered a synopsis every day to Sariputta, something like that. That's part of the lore that I regard as a little not quite believable. But the scholars, like Bhikkhu Analayo, think that the Abhidhamma was created about 250 years after the death of the Buddha. It's part of what's called the Pali Canon. There's the Sutta part, there's the Vinaya part, which is monks and nuns discipline, and there's the Abhidhamma. They're all considered canonical in the whole Theravadan tradition, but I don't regard the Abhidhamma as original in the way that the Suttas and Vinaya are. I don't regard them as the word of the Buddha. The Abhidhamma is an amazing work. The authors tried to explain in a very precise way the way that moment by moment experience unfolds due to prior causes and conditions. And so it's looking at detail into mind states and states of body and meditative development and the influence of karma and all of that. They purported that it was complete. What they tried to do was systematize the teachings of the Buddha. In the Pali Canon, they're kind of random. You know, he'll have one talk on meditation, then he'll have another talk on the aggregates, and then he'll have a talk on lay people showing respect to their parents. And things, just one after another, just very mixed up. The Abhidhamma authors tried to draw out a system from all of those stray talks and make it complete. So they purported to explain every moment of experience based on their fundamentals. And they took 7 volumes to do it. It's quite a work. It's a very impressive work. And I don't think it's the work of the Buddha. So, place for an opinion. In my view, the problem with the Abhidhamma is they tried to get too systematic. They tried to define everything, and I think the Buddha was wiser in leaving some of it unexplained. Okay, example. If you take up the notion of rebirth, if you give a little bit of credibility to that, how long do you think it would be between your death and the next rebirth? Hard to say, right? So the Abhidhamma said there is no time. I said there's one mind moment at the end of this life, and then the next birth starts in the very next mind moment. Tibetans have a totally different take on this. Have you heard of the bardos? So in the Tibetan system, someone dies, and then their consciousness goes into a bardo state for, they say, 49 days, where they're having many, many different experiences and visions and happenings, and then eventually takes birth, sort of at the end of those 49 days. So the Abhidhamma says one thing, Tibetan Buddhism, and they're pretty knowledgeable about death. If you look into Tibetan descriptions, they kind of know the territory. They say something else. I'm not saying I believe exactly, but they're pretty knowledgeable about death. So, what's the truth? So I don't know either. But it is interesting. Take the Abhidhamma view, one mind moment at the end of this life, next mind moment at the start of another life. There are a couple of suttas where the Buddha talks about something happening in the interval. And what he says is that a non-returner, which is the third stage of enlightenment, can occasionally get enlightened in the interval from one birth to the next. So in the interval doesn't sound like zero to me. It doesn't sound like no time at all. So the Buddha didn't talk about that, how long it was, but this phrase in the interval suggests to me there's some time between one and the next. So, again, my opinion, I think there's a lot of wonderful insight in the Abhidhamma, and I don't believe it 100%. I don't even believe it 95%. So, that's my take. And the term Abhidhamma, literally means higher Dhamma, but my teacher Ajahn Buddhadasa, who was always a little bit of a rebel, said in his view it means too much Dhamma. It's a little bit my feeling too. So then the next interesting text that is found in the Theravadan school is the Visuddhimagga. Literally this means path of purification. And I mention this book because it's very influential today still in actual meditation practice and teaching. So the Visuddhimagga was written down in 5th century Sri Lanka by a monk named Buddhaghosa. Bhikkhu Buddhaghosa. Bhikkhu Buddhaghosa forms a very, very important juncture in the development of Theravadan Buddhism. He was an academic, a scholastic, 5th century Sri Lanka. In between the Buddha's death and 5th century Sri Lanka, it was about 800 years, there was a lot of practice. People were on fire with the Dhamma. For hundreds of years after the Buddha's death, there were a lot of monasteries and nunneries and people practicing to full awakening over all those centuries. And then we come to Buddhaghosa, 4th century Sri Lanka, and what he inherited were the writings that started, after 400 years, not only of the suttas, but also of commentaries. So all these monks and nuns were practicing, and guess what? They had opinions. They had views and opinions about what they'd been practicing and what was in the original suttas. And they wrote them down as commentaries. So these commentaries accumulated in Sri Lanka, which was really the birthplace of the writing down stuff. And they landed in the lap of this monk named Buddhaghosa. So Buddhaghosa, real scholar, he read through all these old commentaries. And he wrote his own based on them. So I think probably what he thought is that he was taking the best of them, compiling them, and simplifying them for future generations. So there are commentaries on all the main Nikayas. There's a commentary on the Majjhima, there's a commentary on the Digha, a commentary on the Samyutta, on Anguttara, and so forth. All written by Buddhaghosa, based on the earlier commentaries that had been accumulating for centuries. These commentaries of Buddhaghosa's are still available today in Pali. They haven't been translated into English, but they're available in Pali. And if you read something like the Majjhima, and you read Bhikkhu Bodhi's footnotes, which I highly encourage, he'll quote what's said in the commentary to that sutta about the Majjhima. So it's very interesting to read. Some of the comments I agree with, some of them I don't. But it's interesting to see that people back then had a definite view on what was being recorded in the suttas. So, Marianne.
I'm just curious, when did writing start to become commonplace? Like 400, it sounds like a few hundred years after Buddha?
Yeah,
death?
about 400 years after the Buddha, things started to be written down. That's when the suttas started to be written down, and that presumably is when the commentaries started to be written. Yeah, and then this is about 400 years later. The Buddhaghosa is collecting these commentaries and compiling his own. So you can read those if you want to read Pali. They haven't been translated into English. But it is interesting to get a peek back into what the thinking was. This is what, 1,600 years ago or so. The curious thing is, none of those original commentaries that Buddhaghosa was drawing from survived. What happened to them? Nobody knows. If you were rewriting the whole commentarial tradition, would you want to keep the evidence alive? Or would you want to bury it? If you kept the evidence alive, you could be challenged, couldn't you? People would say, oh, I read that commentary. I have a really different take than what you've written down, Bhikkhu. So I don't know if those earlier commentaries were lost, destroyed, burned, or whatever. But at any rate, we've never had a way to check back on what Bhikkhu Buddhaghosa was drawing from. Even to this day, those are not available. But we have Bhikkhu Buddhaghosa's take on them all. Those are available in Pali. So around this same time, he decided to write a meditation manual. And this is what's called the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification. And he compiled the popular meditation techniques of the day and showed how they led to depth in meditation and how they could lead to awakening. It's a very, very influential text because it created the model for a lot of the Burmese lineages. We'll get into that in a bit. So it created a description of what deepening in meditation means. And it's called Path of Purification because each of the stages is a level of purity. So there's a whole section on sila, and there's a purity that comes out of following sila. There's a whole section on concentration, because there's a purity that comes when you settle the mind, concentrate the mind, and let go of the hindrances. Then there's a whole section on wisdom, because purification comes when you have liberating insight into anicca, dukkha, anatta, and the deathless. So you'll notice that the book is framed in terms of sila, samadhi, and panya. And so it has very detailed meditation instructions, and it has very detailed instructions on how to gauge your progress in meditation according to Buddhaghosa's system. Very powerful system, still at work today. Have any of you heard the term progress of insight? Yeah. Mahasi Sayadaw has a booklet called Progress of Insight, and it describes the stages that meditators go through in his style of meditation, and it's based on the Visuddhimagga. So this text is very influential even today. So I just mentioned here that IMS is a Theravadan center, so the retreats at IMS are from Theravadan lineages. Spirit Rock, I'm not sure where Spirit Rock stands. I think it considers itself a Theravadan center, but they have had retreats from other teachers. I taught 3 retreats there with Soni Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan Dzogchen teacher. Mingyur Rinpoche has taught there. Anam Tubten, another Dzogchen teacher, still teaches there. So Spirit Rock may have a different relationship to lineages, and I'm not sure where IMC is, so I'm not going to talk about that today. So this brings up the question, the Theravadan school brings up the question of vehicles. Have you heard the term Mahayana? Do any of you consider yourselves in a Mahayana lineage? Okay. Yeah. I have been partly in a Mahayana lineage, for years as well. So I've practiced in both Tibetan tradition and Theravadan tradition. So the Mahayana teachers, up until recent times, also were aware of us, but they had a different name for us. They didn't call us Theravadan. What did they call us? Hinayana. So the word Hina, I don't know if you know this. What's it usually translated as? Lesser vehicle. The crummy vehicle. So the Mahayana is the greater vehicle and we're the lesser vehicle, right? I've never liked that term. It turns out that in the Pali, the term Hina, to translate it as lesser, would be really generous. Okay, this is from the Pali English Dictionary. The Pali Text Society's Pali English Dictionary was the gold standard for, 50 years, 100 years. Do you all know about the digital Pali dictionary? Yeah. There's a recent dictionary that's come out that's available on the web and also on an app on phones. And it's better than the Pali English Dictionary because it has English to Pali as well as Pali to English, and it has a lot of the declensions that the Pali English Dictionary doesn't. So it's highly recommended. But anyway, the Pali English Dictionary was my standard for a long time. And the meaning they give to the word hina is poor, miserable, vile, base, abject, contemptible, despicable. So do you like being referred to as the vile vehicle? So we've tried to educate Tibetan teachers that term is a little bit disrespectful to our lineage, and most of them are now adopting the term Theravadan for us. Is that right speech? I question. Yeah. So things are improving. But the other thing I find interesting, if you look at popular Tibetan teachers who are in contact with a lot of Westerners, I'm thinking of people like Lama Surya Das, Soni Rinpoche, and Mingyur Rinpoche, you'll notice that what they're doing is teaching people mindfulness. Instead of diving into the deep end of Tibetan Vajrayana practices, they're teaching their students mindfulness and how to work with difficult emotions and hindrances. So where'd they learn that stuff? From Western Vipassana students, because they teach a lot of Western Vipassana students. And they saw their students needed that. So and this is what I think is the greater honor, they're incorporating a lot of our practices into their teaching. And now they recognize that the teachings of Vipassana and Metta are actual foundation practices that they can build upon and use to teach other forms of meditation that they really value. So I think things are looking up in that world. So one of our teachers, Ajahn Amro, doesn't like to even use the term Mahayana because it brings by association the term Hinayana. So he talks about the northern schools, China, Tibet, Japan, Korea, and the southern schools, Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka. So that's a way to get out of this whole problem altogether, the northern schools and the southern schools. So Wes Nisker, do you all know Wes Nisker? Yeah. Used to edit the Inquiring Mind, passed away about a year ago. Had a nice line about this. He said, greater vehicle, lesser vehicle, all vehicles will be towed away at owner's expense. So it's a good way to think of it. All vehicles will be towed away. Okay, so that's the background to our Theravadan school. And now I want to get into the heart of the presentation. Who are the key Asian teachers? And what are the lineages that we've inherited that occupy our meditations? whether we formally acknowledge them or not. We've been influenced a lot by these people. So we're going to talk about the two main countries that they come from, Burma and Thailand. So from Burma, we'll start with Mahasi Sayadaw and his students, Manindraji, Deepama, and Shui Umin, and others. Pawak Sayadaw and his students, Tongpulu Sayadaw, and students, Ubakin and students, of whom the best known is an Indian teacher named S.N. Goenka, Goenkaji. And then from Thailand, we'll look at Ajahn Mun, who is very influential in the history of the Thai forest tradition, and Ajahn Chah, who was a student of his. And then Ajahn Chah's students, here are just some of the Western ones who have been very, very influential. Ajahn Sumedho, Amaro, Suchito, Kittisaro. And I should have put Ajahn Pasano in that list. We'll get to him later, from Abhayagiri. Ajahn Mahabua, who was also a student of Ajahn Mun. Ajahn Buddhadasa, who was my teacher in Thailand. And Ajahn Lee Damodaro, very influential for Thanissaro Bhikkhu, teacher of a teacher of Thanissaro Bhikkhu. And the image there is of the Shwedagon, which is an important temple in Rangoon. It's more ceremonial than practice-oriented, but it's very beautiful and a site of pilgrimage for Burmese people. So let's look into some of these. But before we do, I want to ask a group question. Bring out this Dharma ancestry stuff. Let's say you're going on a 7-day Vipassana retreat. IRC, Spirit Rock, IMS. 7-day retreat led by a team of teachers. Not a specialized, it's not a concentration retreat, it's just a generic Vipassana retreat. The 7-day retreat, that means there are 6 full days of practice. So you settle in, you sit through the opening night, you get sleepy and dull and take the precepts and all. The next morning you come into the meditation hall and hear the morning instructions. What instructions do you hear on the first day? Often there's something before that. In the territory, what are first morning instructions usually? The managers cover that the night before.
If we use the microphone, then the people online can hear the people talking here.
Nice. Or this is so short, I'll just repeat. First instruction you might hear on a meditation retreat. Breath. Right? Isn't that what we usually open with? Which is part of mindfulness of the body, a special part. That's what I opened with today. Breath. Day 2. What do you hear? Mindfulness of the body. So we turn the attention to body sensations. What are the instructions on morning 3? Mind, something about mind, something usually specific. Hindrances. You've been in meditation for 2 full days. Guess what's coming up? The hindrances. So the instructions need to point to them. Otherwise, people are going to run out of the room, screaming. We have to get hindrances in early. Day 3. Day 4? The other? Say? Emotions, yeah. The other parts of the mind. So we've opened up mind states with hindrances, but they're just a small part of what's there. So we open up to all the mind states, difficult and beautiful. Day 4, mind states. Day 5. What are those little things that start running through? Thoughts, right? People are sitting there, sometimes plagued by thoughts. Constant visitors for all of us, early days of retreats. Better teach people how to be mindful of them. And this is actually a brilliant turning point. When people discover they can be mindful of a thought They don't have to be carried away by it, and they don't even have to believe in it. I am not my thoughts. This is eye-opening. You all have probably been doing it for so long you've forgotten. This is eye-opening for people. I can be mindful of my thoughts. Okay? 6th day, last day of the retreat. We've done breath, body, hindrances, emotions, thoughts. What do you do now? You could do intentions, but this is the last day. It could be big mind. What would sum it all up? Choiceless something or other? What about choiceless attention? Where in this practice, choiceless attention, some people call it choiceless awareness, but it's not that the awareness is choiceless. We unanchor the attention from anything fixed. We let it move, and what we discover is the attention will keep moving. Wherever it lands, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought, emotion, we make that the focus for mindfulness. May not last very long, attention may move to something else. Each time it moves, we make that the focus for mindfulness. And we can do this because of the first 5 days. We've already done breath, body, hindrances, emotions, and thoughts. So we can open it up now in our meditation to be with any of those things in choiceless attention. Does this sound familiar? Sound like a pattern that you've seen in group retreat, team-led retreats? Where do you think this came from? Mahasi Sayadaw. So this is what I mean by Dharma ancestry. We've absorbed his approach to mindfulness, thinking, of course that's the sensible approach to mindfulness. But he's the one who thought it all out and introduced it. So he's enormously influential. So let's move on to Mahasi Sayadaw. Very highly respected in the Theravadan world. I would say the most influential meditation teacher of the last century in the Theravadan tradition. And we have soaked up a lot of his teachings without necessarily knowing they came from him. I want to talk about how highly respected he was in the Theravadan world. I talked about the first Buddhist council. After the Buddha's death, the monks all came together and remembered as much of the teachings as they could. And then they assigned groups to memorize them and keep passing them on. You could imagine, this is the most precious thing people had ever seen in their life, and the founder has died. You could just start listening to Mahakassapa and Sariputta and Ananda and their teachings, but they wanted to preserve the Buddha's teachings. They had proper respect for the source of things. So they memorized them at that first Buddhist council. Then over the centuries, there have been second, third, fourth, and so on, Buddhist councils. The 6th Buddhist council happened in Rangoon in 1956, where people from all around, monastics from all around the Theravadan world came together to talk about what's authentic, what's valid, what's worth preserving. Interestingly, they came from, Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka, probably Vietnam also, maybe China. How would they communicate to each other? They didn't all speak each other's languages, but they all spoke Pali. Pali is not a living language, but they knew it well enough to talk to each other in Pali, and that's how they communicated. So Mahasi Sayadaw was one of the key leaders of this council. He was chosen to be one of the keys, like a referee, in the conversations. That's how respected he was. Most influential meditation teacher, he established hundreds of centers around the world. And I think you can count IMS clearly as one of the ones that was established due to him. And I suspect IMC also, due to him, and many, many others around Asia and the West, due to his influence. And what was so, I would say, kind of revolutionary about his approach to meditation, it took in everything. If you go to many, many traditional Asian teachers, they'll teach you how to be with the breath and get concentrated. They'll teach you something about impermanence and how to see change. But they don't necessarily teach you how to be mindful of every part of your experience. And that's what Mahasi Sayadaw did. Anything that happens in your field of experience with choiceless attention can be the focus for mindfulness. This was his innovation. This was kind of revolutionary. And you can see the effect it's had. We all know what should happen in a meditation retreat now. So that was his genius. And then he added to that the noting practice. Any of you ever practiced noting? Yeah, that's the basic. You notice where the attention is drawn and you put a little label on it. Very powerful practice for developing concentration. It really tells you whether you're present or not. Is the note happening or is it not? If it's not happening, you spaced out. If it's happening, you're being mindful. Very powerful. The other thing that Mahasi Sayadaw, he didn't introduce, but he promoted, were retreats for lay people. Monasteries used to be just for monks and nuns. What was a layperson's role in a monastery? It was to bring food and bow. There are quite a lot of monasteries in Asia now where that is still the role of lay people, to bring food and bow. Mahasi Sayadaw said, no, we want lay people to come here and do retreats. Could be 10 days, could be 3 months. I have friends who went and practiced at his center in Burma, basically for 5 years. I had one friend who spent 2 years in intensive retreat at Mahasi Center in Rangoon. Well, you could stay in an open-ended way at those centers. And then he spent some time studying. He was a monk for 5 years, but he spent 2 years in intensive practice at one point. But it opened up because he could come in as a layperson, and then he ordained. But Mahasi Sayadaw was actually not the first person in Burma to organize retreats for lay people. That was Ledi Sayadaw, L-E-D-I, who you may never even have heard of. But he was very influential in this way. And the reason he did it, I think this was probably late 1800s. I'm not exactly sure. There's a very good book you can read about him if you want. It's called The Birth of Insight. There's going to be a book list at the end of today, and I didn't have it on my mind at the time to put it on the book list, but it actually is recommended. The Birth of Insight about Ledi Sayadaw. He was the first one I know of who made a real effort to create retreats for lay people. And he did it for a reason. It wasn't just out of the goodness of his heart, although I'm sure that was there too. His compassion was there too. It was because the British were colonializing Burma at that time. And the British brought with them Christianity. And Ledi Sayadaw was worried that the promotion of Christianity by the British colonials was going to undermine the role of Buddhism in the country. And he didn't want to see that happen. So he wanted to expand the reach of real Dharma understanding, and he did that by bringing lay people in to practice in his monasteries. So he first established I think probably the idea of the 10-day retreat for lay people. And then Mahasi Sayadaw picked it up and carried it on. So he actually came to IMS in 1979. I was on staff at the time. I got to meet him, and I sat the retreat that he taught when he was there. Actually, I'll go to the next picture because this is a shot from that retreat in 1979. Do you recognize some of these people? Yeah. Okay, so from your left to right, Sharon, Joseph, and Jack are seated lower down. And the fourth person is Jacqueline Mandel, who was teaching with them at the time, but has since left the Theravadan tradition to teach in other schools. But Joseph, Sharon, and Jack were authorized at this time by Mahasi Sayadaw to teach his style to Westerners. This was not a common thing. I don't think he had ever authorized a lay teacher to teach in his style before. So it was a deep recognition of the depth of their practice and giving that authorization to them. And you may also know a couple of the other people in this photograph. Mahasi Sayadaw obviously is in the center. And they had these fans created. I don't know what it says. I couldn't read that small, but it's probably something like Mahasi Sayadaw World Tour 1979. When he arrived at the Boston airport, they were the last people off the plane. They didn't want to rush. They didn't want to be bumped. So they waited for everybody else to exit, and then they came out holding up these fans. Dignified, slow, stately. These 5 monks came off the plane. They weren't going to be rushed, for anything. First trip to the West, ho-hum, but we have teachings. So in Asia, the symbolism of the fan is teachers would also often put the fan up in front of their face in giving a Dharma talk to emphasize that the body of the person giving the talk isn't the important thing, it's the teachings. It's just the words of the Buddha that are the important things. The charisma or whatever of the individual isn't key. So the teacher can be behind a fan and the Buddha's teachings still come across. So to the left of Mahasi Sayadaw is a monk you may have heard of, Sayadaw U Janaka. Ring any bells? So Sayadaw U Janaka, in this, he looks like Mahasi Sayadaw's left-hand man. And that was kind of the read I had on him. Went back to Burma, had his own monastery there called Chamye Monastery. So he was also known as the Chamye Sayadaw. And of all the other monks who came, he was the one I was most drawn to. If I had gone to Burma to practice then, I would have looked up U Janaka. So one person you...
On our left? Next to Mahasi on our left?
Mahasi's left. Mahasi's left. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, is U Janaka. One person you may have heard of, Arya Baumann, who's an Austrian teacher in Europe, stayed with U Janaka for something like 20 years as a nun. Now teaches as a lay woman in the West and really learned his method, which was Mahasi's method, really, really well. And then to Mahasi Sayadaw's right, which is your left, is U Silananda. Have you heard of U Silananda? He lived in Daly City. Mahasi left him here. He said, okay, I need a missionary. He left him here, and U Silananda set up a monastery in Daly City and taught there until he died in, 2010 or something. Died in recent memory. And U Silananda established the Tathagata Center. Do you know the Tathagata Center? Best kept secret in the Bay Area. It's a Mahasi-oriented retreat center in San Jose. They run 4 month-long retreats a year there, and a lot of shorter retreats. It's just down the road from here. The catch is strict schedule. They expect you to keep up a very strict sit-walk schedule and be on 8 precepts. But if you don't mind that and practicing according to Mahasi Sayadaw's instructions, the daily rate is, get ready for it, $30 a day. Because there's a lot of support from the Burmese community and the Vietnamese community. This community has a very large Vietnamese component. A lot of support from the community for meditation practice. So it's called Tathagata, T-A-T-H-A-G-A-T-A. It was a word the Buddha called himself. He didn't call himself the Buddha, he called himself the Tathagata, just down the road in San Jose. So those are the two other monks that I remember from that retreat. So as we mentioned, this became the foundation for many IMS teachers and teachings, and also Spirit Rock and IMC, IRC. His meditation instructions are explicitly the instructions that are used in the IMS 3-month course. Yes?
When you get a chance, could you comment on the manual, how that came
Manual of Insight? I will, yeah, sure, happy to, yeah. These meditation instructions are explicitly the basis for the IMS 3-month course and the Spirit Rock 2-month course. The teaching teams for those retreats basically sign on to the idea that they'll use what I now call the westernized Mahasi set of instructions. So you know how when we went through the 6-day sequence, we broke it up? Breath, body, hindrances, etc. When Mahasi Sayadaw would give instructions, someone would come new to the monastery, he'd lay out the whole thing in one instruction period. And they'd say, now go to your room and do it. So I don't know if he was starting from choiceless attention at the very beginning and then guided people, because he used the breath in the belly as a primary object. You know, this is what you came to if nothing else was going on. This is what you started with to start your retreat. So I'm not sure exactly how specific he got. But the way that we break it up now, we refer to as the westernized Mahasi set of instructions, giving the components over different days. Let's do this and then we'll do the manual. Go ahead, Rachel.
Last year, when I was at the Forest Refuge, I listened to, I think, it was Lineages on the 3-month, it was like 84 or something. Would you mind? Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry. Last year when I was on retreat, I listened to the set of instructions given at the 1984 3-month retreat, laid out by Jack and Joseph and Menindraji. And it was the same, it's the same progression, exactly. But they didn't do any guided meditations.
Oh, interesting.
They just gave the instructions and then silence.
Okay.
So I'm curious if you remember or know when, and if Mahasi Sayadaw or any in your experience over in Asia, did they do guided meditations, or when did guided meditations start happening with the instructions?
Yeah, I don't think they did guided meditations at the Mahasi Center, but I think Joseph has been doing them for a long time. If you look at his book, Experience of Insight, from like 1975 or something, I think his meditations were guided then. Yeah.
I was surprised. It was the same instructions,
Interesting.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
But then they just stopped.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Good. Thanks. Now that the mic is out, let's go back to the manual. Tell us a little background of the manual that you're mentioning.
My experience comes from doing intensive retreats with Temple Smith and with a small group of us in the East Bay. And one of those intensives over a 3-month period was going through the manual. And it had a profound impact on me, how detailed it was, and it just laid out the path. And how surprising the path was. I thought it was very linear. Turns out to not be linear at all.
Yeah, yeah. So this is the book Manual of Insight, right? That's
Right.
in that brown,
Pretty
thick
thick.
brown book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only
Thank you.
recently available, if I
Yes.
recall.
Yeah. So the Manual of Insight was a labor of deep love by Steve Armstrong, Kamala Masters, Da Viranyani, and another translator, I think. Mahasi Sayadaw had created this book in Burma to kind of lay down for posterity his vision of the path, his understanding of the path. But it was all in Burmese. Or maybe it was in Pali. I can't remember the original. But it was in a foreign language from us. And Steve and Kamala and Da Viranyani had the ambition to create it and reproduce it in English. And it took them years. It took them years to do the translation, check out all the Pali passages, because Mahasi Sayadaw had died at that point. But I think U Pandita was still alive and giving his blessing to the project. And U Pandita insisted that the Pali that Mahasi Sayadaw was talking from be included, either as a footnote or as an appendix. So they had to verify the Pali passages and get them in a good, proper grammatical form, and make sure that the translation was faithful to the original. So I think it was probably reviewed from some of Mahasi's old students, who could read English as well. And then Wisdom Publications agreed to publish it. So it's an incredible reference work. And as you're indicating, it's dense, right? It took you 3 months to get through it. Yeah. A very dense book, but if you want kind of the ultimate presentation of the Mahasi Sayadaw Path of Practice, Manual of Insight, is the work, and it's still in print from Wisdom. We bow to the Manual of Insight. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. So this is a good place for us to take our morning break. You've been sitting very patiently, and we still have more to go. So why don't we take, let's try for a 10-minute break, and come back about 10:40, and we'll carry on. So a couple of questions have come in from the online folks, and so I thought I'd just address those before we get into the second half. One is, I said that I thought there were very few inaccuracies in the English translations of the Pali texts, and the question was that due to the translation, or was it inherent in the Pali text? And I meant inherent in the Pali text. There are now a number of variations on the translations of the suttas, but they're all reasonably good. I really like Bhikkhu Bodhi's language and phrasing. I think he's quite elegant. Other people may be a little more literal. So if there's a sutta that I care about, I will often read 2 or 3 different translations to see what people say. But on the whole, the Western translations I find very good. And then another comment was that Usilananda, who is the monk to the right of Mahasi Sayadaw in that photo, did speak at IMC. So someone from online noticed that he spoke here in the 1990s. And was there another comment with that? Yeah, he spoke here, yeah. All in the family. Mahasi what? Okay, please, yeah, and do it through the mic.
Thank you. Okay. Did Mahasi Sayadaw ever lay out samadhi instructions, jhana instructions?
Not to my knowledge. What's interesting is that we learned our jhana practice. So I'd say most of the IMS and Spirit Rock teachers on the long retreats are willing to teach jhanas if you have real familiarity with Vipassana practice and ask ahead of time. And the way that we learned it was instructions from U Pandita. So I don't know that Mahasi Sayadaw ever taught jhana, but U Pandita certainly did, but then I wonder where he learned it from. Yeah. And he's not alive, so we can't ask him that.
Is it in the manual on jhanas? No,
No.
it's not in there?
I haven't read the whole manual, but no, it isn't. Yeah.
And is there a reason why at IMS or Spirit Rock on the long ones that we don't start with settling a little bit more with like we do on our September retreats?
Yeah.
Why did they decide not to let us hang out with some samadhi for a minute
Yeah.
before we go?
So the question is, in starting a long retreat, would it make sense to have a few days of settling to generate good samadhi before moving into Vipassana? So that's a topic of some debate among the teachers of those courses, and different people have different views. So the way I recall, the last time I taught at the 3-month was in 2022, and we gave 4 days to the breath at the beginning for that very reason. Some teachers...
We did 4 days on the breath at the beginning?
That's what I remember.
Your memory is probably better than mine.
Well, I'm not sure about that, Rachel.
My first 3-month retreat, I was, Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so some people would prefer to do longer. So what Rachel's referring to, Sally and I taught a retreat at the Forest Refuge this September that Rachel was on. We did 10 days on the breath. We had a month-long retreat, so we did 10 days on the breath. And that's very powerful. I mean, I meet a lot of senior Vipassana practitioners who have never spent 10 days on the breath. It's something that's really worth doing. It is the kind of traditional approach to jhana, but we weren't teaching it primarily for jhana, just for settling. So it's a good thing to do if you have the possibility.
We have 3 months,
Most people are only there for 6 weeks. No, I agree. I think it'd be worth doing. And the breath doesn't work for everybody. There are people, if you've had injury in the chest, if you've had trauma around chest, the breath, focusing here might bring that up. So breath isn't the best focus for some people. Yeah. Yeah. Why don't you take the mic?
Getting back to the history, it sounds like the method of meditation practice that people here most are so familiar with, and that dates back to Mahasi Sayadaw, that he innovated it, and that he laid out the specific instructions. So the question is, how congruent is that with the instructions in the Pali Canon? Does it depart, or is it perfectly congruent, but he just adds some more specific instructions?
Yeah, this question about meditation instructions in the Pali Canon is an interesting one because there are only 3 or 4 main suttas with meditation instructions in the whole of the 2,000 pages of the Pali Canon. So the Buddha was not in the habit, apparently, of teaching specific instructions over and over. So what's happened is in the Theravadan tradition, people have taken the basic instructions of the Pali Canon and then interpreted, modified, added, and refined. So the main instructions are in the Satipatthana Sutta, Foundations of Mindfulness, and in the Anapanasati Sutta, Discourse on Mindfulness of Breathing. And just over centuries, so many different techniques have built up on what I regard as the rather sparse instruction in the Pali Canon. For example, now here's an example of the ambiguity. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha says one sits down, cross-legged and establishes mindfulness in front. Right? Why mindfulness in front?
And what does that mean?
Yeah, and what does that mean? So some people have interpreted it to mean that it should be on the breath at the nose. That's what in front means. But I don't think that is definitive in the way the Buddha gave the instruction. For instance, Mahasi Sayadaw did not put any emphasis on breath at the nose. He directed people to the abdomen. So what I've heard about that is he didn't direct people to breath at the nose because it too easily led to jhana.
Too easily?
Too easily led to jhana. Burmese people, I'm going to do a gross generalization here, this is a view, are more apt to be good meditators than Westerners are. The reason, because they have often led simpler lives and haven't gotten university trained, where all their mental activity goes on through thoughts in the brain. So there are some very quick studies among Burmese who take to meditation. I was practicing with Pa Auk Sayadaw, and we would go for interviews to see him every day on his porch. And we'd just line up, and we would hear the interviews in front of us. And so, I'd be sitting there waiting to report, and I was dealing with the hindrances or something like that. And this young Burmese guy goes up and reports, "Oh, I was sitting for 3 hours in third jhana yesterday." Humbling. It's humbling. So I think due to simpler lifestyle and calmer culture, their minds, most Burmese people's minds are not as stirred up as ours. So Mahasi Sayadaw found that if people turned to the breath first, they'd go into jhana, and that's not where he wanted them. So he directed them to the belly, and then that created controversy because many people said, "Oh, the Buddha said develop mindfulness in front. That means the nose." But the Buddha didn't say the nose. So Mahasi Sayadaw actually got criticized a lot in the early years, A, because he wasn't sending people to jhana first, because that was often considered essential, and B, because he was having them feel the breath in the belly. So the Buddha's instructions are fairly limited, and that gave room for a lot of interpretation and variety over the years. I mean, I've meditated with the breath dozens of different ways. When you think about the places we could observe, nose, chest, belly, whole body, with noting or without noting. You put all those variations together, it just gives a lot of different ways, and they've all been taught, by different people. So the Buddha's instructions were fairly sparse, and over the years they've just been improvised on and filled in.
It sounds like Mahasi Sayadaw's new instructions, his elaborations, were needed.
Yeah,
Thank you. Okay.
I think they were. I don't know of anyone who preceded him in the way he gave them, and they were controversial at the time from the more orthodox.
This is great. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the other teachers in the lineage of Mahasi Sayadaw. I'm sure you're familiar with these names. Munindraji was early teacher of Joseph. I'll get to all of them in a little more detail. Dipa Ma was a student of Munindraji. Sayadaw U Pandita was a student of Mahasi Sayadaw, took over Sati Center in Rangoon after he died, or as he was approaching death. It was turned over to Sayadaw U Pandita. And then Sayadaw U Tejaniya has come along in recent years and has been quite popular. So let's look a little bit at each of these. They're all important parts of our lineage. Munindraji was an Indian man. He was born in Bengal, which still has a lot of Buddhist influence. Dipa Ma is also from Bengal, so kind of native Buddhist roots there. Trained in Rangoon with Mahasi Sayadaw for 9 years. So he was a serious practitioner and scholar at the time. And then he established the Burmese Vihara in Bodh Gaya, and that's where Joseph ran into him. So Joseph went to Munindra about a year after he'd established the Burmese Vihara and stayed with him more or less for 7 years, coming back to the States to make money, going back to India to spend a long time in practice. He was Dipa Ma's teacher. They were both from Bengal, so they had this connection. He taught her insight meditation, then the jhanas, and out of that flowed psychic powers. So we'll talk about that more when we get to Dipa Ma. She was a special yogi. Munindraji's teaching style, he described it as simple and easy, or maybe that's Joseph's description. When you think about Mahasi Sayadaw, sometimes you think about stern, strict, follow the book. Munindra was not like that at all. He didn't set a schedule for people. People found their own schedules, and they worked hard. Joseph said that there was one other guy at the Burmese Vihara, and they'd sort of compete with each other to see who would stay up latest every night. So they were doing serious practice. But Munindra's style was not pushing or goal-oriented or forcing. He just let people unfold. And he knew a lot because he had been with Mahasi Sayadaw for so long. He came to teach at IMS in 1977. So I met him there. Munindraji had one of the styles of teaching that I would call Dharma fountain. If you asked him a question, you were turning on a tap. And that tap could run for a few hours. And people often said about Munindraji's answers, he didn't necessarily answer the question you asked, he answered the question you wanted. And he wanted to answer. So, answer the question he wanted to answer. So he was light, he was playful, kind of charming. Man. And then Dipa Ma, an incredible yogi. Of all the Theravadan teachers I've met, most amazing yogi was Dipa Ma. She started meditating because she'd had profound grief after losing a husband and 2 children. I think it was just illness. I don't think it was anything more. And it threw her into a real depression, and the friend said she should try meditation, so she did. And she experienced stream entry, which is the first stage of enlightenment, at her second retreat. This is probably a second 10-day retreat in Rangoon with Mahasi Sayadaw. So Munindraji picked her up. Munindraji was in Bodh Gaya, Dipa Ma was in Calcutta. They were not that far apart. She came to him for teachings, and he saw her meditative potential. So he taught her jhanas, and out of jhanas is where one gets access to psychic powers. Now this is what's interesting. Munindra didn't have psychic powers himself. He didn't have the concentration to develop them. But he recognized Dipama did, but he didn't know how to do it. So what did he do? He picked up the Visuddhimagga. Visuddhimagga has detailed instructions for how to enter jhana and then how to attain psychic powers. That's one of the interesting things about this book. It's not one we use very often, but at the right time, there's nothing else like it. So that's still available. If you want to develop psychic powers, good luck. So Dipama had this ability to visit other realms, heaven realms, higher realms, and notice what was happening there. So one time, she was teaching at IMS. She taught at IMS a few times. And the teachers were going for a walk with her. And there's a pond at IMS called Gaston Pond. How many of you have been to IMS? Yeah, a number of you. So you probably know the pond. It's about a mile from the center around a loop. It's very beautiful in the fall. The fall colors start turning and they encircle the pond's many acres. They encircle the pond. So they were walking with Dipama around the pond. It was in its full autumn glory of New England. And they said to her, this is pretty beautiful, huh? Is this like the heaven realms? Are the heaven realms this good? And she said, this is nothing compared to the heaven realms. Nothing. So she had experience of these other realms. She had other psychic powers. She would come to an interview with Munindraji when the door was closed. She would just show up in the room. How does that happen? So at one point they tried to document this because many people don't believe stories like this. So they had an Indian university professor be with her off campus somewhere while she showed up in the room with Munindraji. So to verify that she was not moving, not leaving. Anyway. You can read about this in a book on her biography called Dipama. It's written by Amy Schmidt, who was a staff member at IMS for a lot of years. It's on the book list. I've got a reading list that you can pick up. It's actually on the table. Pick up on your way out. Books about the Burmese lineages and books about the Thai lineages. And there's one about Dipama, which is very inspiring. She was considered to be at the third level of enlightenment. It's a non-returner. A non-returner means someone who will not come back to the human realm, will have one more birth, and in that birth will become fully awakened. So she was that far away from being fully awakened. Influenced many Western teachers. Joseph and Sharon were very close to her. She came to IMS in 1980. I had the chance to live with her for a month. I was on staff and I looked after her for a month. Very lovely and loving person. I especially remember how patient she was with her grandson. Her grandson was visiting, and he was a ball of fire. And she would just be so calm and touching with him and sweet and never got on her nerves. She was teaching at IMS one year, and someone asked her, "What's your mind like?" She said, "There are only three things in my mind: peace, metta, and concentration." That's a beautiful mind. So she was very loving and special. Rachel, why don't you take the mic?
Thanks. I think you said recently that to your knowledge, that Deepama never practiced loving kindness, like formally.
I
Is
don't
that
know.
right?
I don't think I've
You
said
don't
that
know.
because I don't know that.
You don't know if she ever did.
I don't know
Yeah.
if she did or not.
So do you think, so we don't know, so peace, metta, and concentration through development of insight, wholesome qualities, but we don't know that there was actually a formal loving kindness practice.
Yeah, I don't know if she did or not.
Because did Munindra teach the Brahma Viharas?
I think he did, but in a light way, not in an intensive way. As I understand it, we learned the intensive practice of the Brahmaviharas from U Pandita.
Yeah.
And that was long after Dipama had done her jhana practice and psychic powers. So I would assume she probably used the breath. That was most common back then. But she just had a lot of natural metta.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, question?
This is probably a little bit off topic, but I remember my second retreat at IRC. I asked Gil when in my interview with him. I asked, "Why
And
do
can
you
you speak a little louder?
Yeah. What do you do what you do? Like, why do you do this?" And he said, "Because I live in a world where we predict the future and people stop. We always striving for the future and stop focus on the here and now." And it struck me, it's the first time I've, see psychic powers that being, mentioned here in this practice. I always think that the future never can predict the future, and the future, we influence the future is so more focused on here and now. I'm a little confused about that. I'm not sure why is it necessary to know about the other realm. Isn't it's important to be here and now? I guess that's where my confusion is, if you understand. Yeah. So anyway.
Like, why bother, right?
Yeah, and yes, if is that true, and why, and I don't even know if it's true, and I'm not necessarily want to, I don't know, like, is it true? Is it, because I was focused on the here and now as the practice, and now it's just like, oh, there's a future that you can predict. Does that mean that my life had been planned out? And, is it 50 fate and 50 willpower? Or what is it? Sorry, it's off topic.
No, that's fine. It's a natural question that would come up when we
Thank
get
you.
onto the topic of psychic powers. First of all, it's not necessary. It's not necessary even for somebody developing to full enlightenment that they develop psychic powers. Manindra didn't have the ability. None of my teachers had the ability, except Deepama. But could it be, the question in my mind is, could it be useful? So one of the psychic powers that comes, I think, kind of at the very beginning, is the ability to read minds. And so as a Dharma teacher, if I had the ability to read the mind of a student who was coming in to see me, I would find that very helpful in knowing how to guide them. So it could be very beneficial. It's not so much about predicting the future. I don't even know if that's one of the ones that's mentioned in the texts. But visiting other realms, I could see could be really inspiring and could give a whole different sense of the universe we live in. If we think the universe is just this earth, where does that leave us when climate change is ravaging the planet? To know that there are other areas of the universe that are free from these kinds of ravages might be very reassuring, might be a ground for faith.
But is that a comparison with, that's the lake where you were talking about? Where it's like, I appreciate nature so much more.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate nature so much more when I'm on retreat. I'm like, whoa, the ground, oh, the tree is amazing, and it's beautiful, and feel like I was missing. Oh my gosh, it's nature things around me that's beautiful as it is. The wall is beautiful if I just pay attention to it or concentrations on it, knowing about the other rhyme. The other thing that better and walking around the lake, this is nothing compared to that. Isn't that taking away the now and here, the beauty of now and here? And you will only live in a comparison, it could be better. Isn't this the best? Isn't now is the best? Isn't now is beauty? Is that, you know what I mean? I don't know if that make any sense. Thank you.
So let me ask, when you started meditation practice, did you discover that there was something more to learn than you knew right then?
I think I discover what being and now is. I remember just the same drive to the meditation. I was in Vietnam on a scooter, driving to the meditation center and was in a rush. but at the same drive on the way back, and life was vivid in front of me. I guess there's nothing new to that I discovered, but I see it now.
Right. Did it enrich your life?
Yes, it's have
Did it
changed
show
my
you new
life.
possibilities?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think in the same way, nobody has to follow psychic powers. They're not needed. And here and now is the best because it's the only one we have. But there's something for me about the Buddha's teachings that points to things that I didn't even think about that are kind of awesome. So for me, it engenders more appreciation of the here and now. And Dipa Ma certainly didn't say that to make Joseph or Sharon discontent. But they asked. So she just said, if you want to compare, there's no comparison. So it's not necessary to even think about other realms. But the Buddha did teach about it. And I think that was to give us a sense of the awesomeness of the universe, the mystery. Sometimes in Western society, I think we can reason our way to everything that's to be known through science. And the possibility of there being other realms kind of opens our mind up wider. And for instance, have you heard of dark matter? Have you all heard of dark matter? Yeah. So scientists tell us, cosmologists tell us, that the matter that we can see in the universe is just a small fraction of all the matter there is. They have no explanation for where that other matter might be located or what it might be. To me, the simple answer is it's the other realms. There are beings and constituents in other realms that make up the rest of the mass of the universe. So I think Western science is kind of aiming towards some discoveries in that way. I don't know how they'll find them. But I think it just shows us the awesomeness and the mystery of the universe. Yeah. But you don't have to have any interest in it for meditation to unfold beautifully. Yeah.
Hi, there is a comment first of all, and then a question from our online participants. It reads, there is a lot of ideas and translations and interpretations of this Pali word, parimakam. The guy translates as in front.
As what?
As in front.
In front. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So the word parimukam, I might be mispronouncing it. The guy translates as in front. So it was more like a comment. And then there is one more. How has the devastating earthquake in Burma, March 2025, affected the Buddhist teachers and Western students?
Is that it, Nena? Those two?
There is one more comment. Predicting the future is now one of the psychic powers mentioned in the Pali Canon. Additionally, glad that some teachers are finally coming around to presenting the psychic powers like this. I guess it is a long time coming due to all the causes and conditions involved in the potentials and the many ways people can receive or not relate and respond to this in the West. Did that make sense, or you want me to read it again?
No, I think I got
Yeah?
it. There's
Okay.
not really a question there, right?
Yeah. That's all.
Okay. So the question about the earthquake in Burma and its effect on the teachers and teachings is not just the earthquake, but also the military coup has really changed the conditions throughout the country, and I think it's impacting everywhere. I think all the teachers and all the students are being impacted by it. We have some friends who are actively working on relief in Burma, and they're finding that many of the places that they've been supporting, like nunneries and schools, are out of food. And the supply of food has become so interrupted by the military action and then by the earthquake as well, that it's hard to find enough to eat. So the monks and the nuns who are in well-supported establishments are really doing a lot of outreach to help the villagers around them. But I think it's impacting the whole country in that way. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to Sayadaw U Pandita. Have you all heard of him? Okay. Very influential teacher in the West. He took over from Mahasi Sayadaw when Mahasi was aging. 1983, I think he took over. And then a lot of Western teachers went to Burma to practice with him there. So this is, partial list: Joseph Sharon, Steve Armstrong, Kamala, Carol, Gil, Michelle, and Sayadaw U Vivekananda, who I'll come back to a little later, Austrian monk. So a lot of the associations with the Mahasi Sayadaw method in the West are connected with people's take on U Pandita. He became the most influential teacher in the West because he came here for years, from the 1980s on. A bunch of people went to practice with him in Burma, and then he came over here very often. And his style was very strict and very demanding. So the most common anecdote that I hear from people who practiced with him, at the end of the interview, they would be leaving the room, and the translator would say to them, "Please try harder." And they were already trying I know some of my friends were already trying very hard. And so this obviously created a dynamic. It could get discouraging for people. So it's important to understand the whole Mahasi Sayadaw style is not U Pandita. Munindraji was much more relaxed and easygoing than this. And Dipama was predominantly very loving and accepting of people. So I remember practicing with Joseph and Sharon at the time when they had recently been practicing with U Pandita. And one of the things they were suggesting was that we sleep 4 hours a night. Continue intensive practice throughout the day and sleep 4 hours a night. That's hard work. So that's demanding and required a lot of effort. But the whole Mahasi style can be taught in many, many different ways. And one of the current ways, Sayadaw U Tejaniya considers himself in the Mahasi lineage. And do you all know his teaching? Yeah. So his teaching style is much more relaxed. I mean, he starts with relaxation. He generally doesn't have a schedule at his monastery. The meditation hall is open all day. You sit when you want, you walk when you want, you lie in your bed when you want. It's a polar opposite from U Pandita. He was a student of a monk named Shwe U Min. Shwe U Min was a peer of U Pandita, and the story that I heard is that as Mahasi Sayadaw knew that he was aging and needed to pass on the monastery, he first offered it to Shwe U Min. But Shwe U Min turned it down because he said he didn't want the responsibility. It was maybe the most famous monastery and practice center in the country. He didn't want that responsibility. So he stayed at his place, which was called Shwe U Min, and preferred to work with a smaller group of students there. So Sayadaw U Tejaniya was one who practiced with him there. Another one, have any of you come across a monk named U Kipapano, Vietnamese teacher? He was also a student of Shui Min. He's 95 years old now, has a center, I think, on the East Coast, but he's still teaching. And he also taught in the lineage of Shui Min. So Shui Min's practice, as I understand it, was primarily about the third foundation, chitta, mind and mind states. So what he taught, as I hear it, was chitta nupassana. So if you're interested, you can read about that style. If you look up chitta nupassana, you can read about that style. But it's very relaxed, and it has to do with, the way I hear it, cultivating a very broad mindfulness that doesn't focus on objects at all. Mindfulness of mind would imply that you're mostly keeping watch on what's going on in your mind. And so one of his key teachings is, what's your attitude in meditation? Are you wanting something to happen? That's greed. Are you wanting something to stop happening? That's aversion. So always keeping an eye on the movement of the kilesas in your practice. So if you're interested in his work, a book that really sums it up is When Awareness Becomes Natural. I think that's a good introduction to his teachings. And he has a lot of Western students who are now teaching this style. Steve Armstrong, Carol Wilson, Andrea Fella, Alexa Santos. I'm sure you know some of them. Key elements in Mahasi Sayadaw's teaching style, the importance of silent, intensive meditation retreats. That's what it's all about in the Mahasi Sayadaw system. The longer, the better. So 10 days is good, 6 weeks is better, 3 months is better, 2 years is better. And the silent, intensive style is really the hallmark. Sit and walk and sit and walk, that's all you do. Strong emphasis on meditation technique. So choiceless attention with mental noting is really the heart of it. And the reporting in interviews is kind of formalized to give a sense of how you're carrying it out, how you're working it in that way. And if you're interested, his book, Practical Insight Meditation, kind of sums up this approach. It does develop strong concentration through the moment-to-moment attention to changing objects. This is not generally the approach of generating strong concentration. It's generally to pick one object and stay with that all the time, whether it's breath or metta phrases. But this concentration on changing objects called Khanika Samadhi, and it does become very strong. Does not require jhana practice. First, it was seen as unorthodox. And there's a clear idea from the teacher of how insight should be unfolding for a student, described by this book called The Progress of Insight. And the reality is, it doesn't always unfold strictly in that linear way, as Paul mentioned earlier, but it does touch on those kinds of insights. And it's intended to lead to the direct realization of the deathless element, or nibbana. It's the whole point for them. Get you enlightened. Why is that important? Because once you're enlightened, you will never have a lower birth in the human realm, number one. And number two, you will become fully enlightened within at most 7 lifetimes. So I mentioned that all our Asian ancestors have this clear Dharma view. And that's one of the fundamental tenets of it. Stream entry is really important in their view for that reason. So some of the strengths, which you're probably familiar with, it gives clear instructions for every moment of experience. You always know what to do. Everything in our experience is a ground for mindfulness, all activities, and especially helpful in mind states and emotions. Develop strong concentration and equanimity. And the equanimity kind of comes out of the seeing of impermanence. We're looking at things as they arise and pass over and over and over. All the sense phenomena in our experience coming and going moment after moment, over and over and over. And so why hang on to any of them? So the impermanence is really what leads to the equanimity. That's the outcome of the insight. And one thing I find interesting is the noting practice makes clear the connection between perception and mindfulness. So this is a little technical. Perception is one of the 5 aggregates. I think it's an underappreciated faculty of mind. When we perceive something, it's recognizing it. And the noting practice emphasizes that recognition. We put it in a category. That's what's happening. So some of the teachers today in this style, I think you probably know most of this. The IMS Long Retreat, Spirit Rock Long Retreat. Kamala Masters teaches in this style a lot. IMS has now what's called a classical Mahasi retreat in the summer, which is to really teach the noting practice really clearly. Gil teaches a lot of retreats at IRC, I think are based in this style. And then I want to say something about Sayadaw Vivekananda. He's an Austrian monk who's been in robes for a long time. I think he probably goes back to the mid-80s with U Pandita. He has a monastery in Lumbini, which is the birthplace of the Buddha, and teaches very carefully according to the Mahasi noting practice. If you're interested in the Mahasi, getting really good in the Mahasi noting practice, I think he's a very skilled teacher at it. So he has a monastery in Lumbini, and he's going to be at the Forest Refuge next June for a month. And then in Asia, because some people like to practice in Asia, I used to recommend that people practice in Asia for a number of reasons. One, you could go there in an open-ended way without much money and stay as long as you want. The second is you could really get a taste for the monastic lifestyle. And it's wonderful to practice as a nun or as a monk for the simplicity of the life and the value of renunciation in those settings. And also, because you're able to stay a long time, you can get to a lot of depth. So most of my friends who went to Asia to practice were motivated by A, the money, and B, the depth that could come from that. So it's become less available these days to find places to practice in Asia where you can go in an open-ended way. But there is a monastery in Malaysia that's open to laymen and women called sasanaraka.org. Something, a question?
There is a question. Is there any manual available teaching momentary concentration, Kanika Samadhi?
I think the best simple instruction set I've seen is Mahasi Sayadaw's booklet called Practical Insight Meditation. That's available online. And then for those who want to go deeper, there is the Manual of Insight, and that's very dense. So that would have those instructions also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then there is a comment from the chat. Luis reports, I practiced with Sayadaw Yu Vivekananda in 2020, Lumbini, Nepal, for a few weeks.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah. No, it's a good option, practicing with Sayadaw in his home monastery. So continuing on through some of the other Burmese teachers, this is Paok Sayadaw, when he was teaching at the Forest Refuge. His main monastery is in southeast Burma. He's not teaching there anymore because he's aging out of active teaching. And he has one of the jhana systems that one will come across often in this country. A lot of people have practiced with him, including Nikki Murgafori. Do you all know Nikki? Yeah. Nikki went to Paok Sayadaw and learned a lot about his jhana system. He is one of the traditionalists who requires very strong samadhi before opening up to vipassana. Although in recent years with a lot of Western students, he's modified that, and if you don't want to pursue jhana, he will teach you vipassana, but it's a lower level of vipassana. He taught for 4 months in a row at the Forest Refuge in 2006. I saw him right after. I said, how was the retreat, Sayadaw? He said, oh, not long enough. He said, very few people succeeded. And for him, succeeding meant getting into first jhana Very few people succeeded, not long enough. And so there are a few IMS teachers, probably overall, who have practiced with him and could teach his style if you're interested. Saida Ujagara comes to IMS regularly, Winnie Nazarko, Nikki, and Pascal Auclair. I practiced with him in 2004. It was a very large monastery. It was one of the interesting things about it. 750 people in residence. And I think 450 of them were monastics at the time, and then 300 lay people. His practice was to develop samadhi, stay with the breath at the upper lip all day long. No other object. Put the attention here, keep the attention here no matter what you're doing. That really does train the mind to stay on one point. So in any activity, just one instruction. Then look for a nimitta, a sign of concentration, as the first indicator of deepening concentration. And that is, for him, a subtle light that forms around the breath. Some people have light in meditation that's just a broad field of white light. He didn't consider that the nimitta. The nimitta needed to be in an area connected with the breath, and it would sort of waver with the breath. And then at first you don't pay attention to the nimitta, because if you do, it'll just vanish. It's not steady enough yet. But when the nimitta becomes strong, steady, and bright, you turn your attention to that, and by focusing the attention there, eventually all the attention gets absorbed into that light, and that's the entryway into jhana for him. And in his version, when you go into first jhana, your body sensations fall away and there are no thoughts. It's a really strong first jhana. And then once you've built up the jhana to that level, then you direct the mind to insight, investigating the three characteristics and leading to nibbana. So, very powerful technique. Tongpulu Sayadaw, a Burmese master, came to IMS in 1979, practiced in a cave for 33 years, which is why he always wore dark glasses inside. Established a monastery in Boulder Creek, Tongpulu Kabaye, I think it's still there. Bob Stahl, who teaches in Santa Cruz, was a student of his when he was a monk. And just a story about his years in the cave. He was practicing for something like 17 years in the cave, and then learned that his teacher had died. So he came out to go to the teacher's funeral, and as he was walking toward the cremation site, two cobras were crossed together on the path that he was walking towards. But Sayadaw just kept walking, and the two cobras drew away. And people said in Burma that was the mark of an arhat, when the cobras drew away. So he is reputed to be fully awakened. Also in Burma, Sayaji U Ba Khin is a layman, the first layperson apart from Dipama that we've seen in this lineage sequence. He was a finance minister in the government of Burma, but also a heavy-duty practitioner. He trained a number of Dhamma teachers at his center in Rangoon, including S.N. Goenka and Ruth Dennison. So that leads us to Goenkaji. Very popular and influential teacher in the whole Vipassana scene. Taught hundreds of retreats in India and worldwide. Sharon's first teacher, early teacher for Joseph. And he taught this very powerful practice connected to the body called sweeping, where you just systematically scan your attention through the body over and over and over. And it's provides very clear insight into anicca, because it's just so obvious the body sensations are just arising and passing, arising and passing. Concentration gets very strong. Charismatic, had a lot of metta. His retreats were on a full dāna basis, meaning no fee, which, as you all know, is rare in the West. IRC has it. It's rare. So they were always full. His retreats are still offered, but they're still using his videos, because he hasn't authorized he never authorized lay teachers to carry on his teachings. So there are assistant teachers there, but they're not giving the Dharma talks or instructions. And his students are not allowed to follow other methods. It's considered to pollute the vibes, to follow other meditation techniques or teachers. And because his retreats are so intense, they're just sitting. There's no walking meditation. There have been a number of breakdowns on his retreats, but they're very powerful.
There is a comment. Betupton.com is a lay Westerner teacher who was ordained as a nun under Pa-Auk for 10 years. Does that make sense? I
Can
am
you say
not-
it? I didn't quite get it all. And then,
Betupton.com is a lay Westerner.
Anam Tupten?
Lightly, it's possible. Betupton.com is a lay Westerner teacher who was ordained as a nun under Pa-Auk for 10 years. Beth Upton.
Beth
is-
Upton.
Beth
Yeah.
Okay, does that make sense? So who was ordained as a nun under Pa-Auk for 10
Pa-Auk
years? Yeah.
Yeah. This is another teacher in the tradition of Pa-Auk Sayadaw. Beth Upton lives in Spain and sometimes teaches in the U.S. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, you ready to move to Thailand? Okay, let's go to the Thai forest tradition. Thai forest tradition has a reputation for being very happy. Do you get that vibe here? Not necessarily. But this is the one who revitalized this style in Thailand, Ajahn Sao, in the late 1800s. Wandered through the forest and was primary teacher of Ajahn Mun, who's even more influential. This is he, continuing the happiness vibe. Greatest influence on the Thai forest tradition in our lifetime. Born on the Lao border and became a student of Ajahn Sao, wandered through the forest with him, very, very ardent practitioner, loved solitude. And he also carried out ascetic practices all his life. We'll get into that a little further. There's a biography of him that's available. It's on the book list. It records when he got to different levels of awakening in his journey. So it sort of records his stream entry, once returner, non-returner, arahant, progress. Very strict teacher. He made the monks sit through the schedule even if they had malaria. Well, it's just the body. Don't worry about that. Keep sitting. And he taught this Tudong style to a lot of great disciples, including Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Lee Damadaro, who passed down to Thanissaro Bhikkhu, and Ajahn Mahabua. So these Tudong monks, this is a Thai kind of activity. I don't know of it happening in Burma. It's a Thai kind of word for Dutanga, which is Pali for ascetic practices. I think there's something like 13 ascetic practices that were identified in the time of the Buddha. So these Tudong monks spent their lives, big chunks of their lives, wandering through the forests, combining ascetic practices with meditation, because there wasn't anything else to do. You go off in the forest, you're going to live really simply, and you're going to meditate a lot. So that was the style, and it was kind of like monks in the lifetime of the Buddha. You hear these words, bhikkhus, there are these empty huts, there are these roots of trees. Meditate now lest you regret it later. So that the Buddha just encouraged people to go off on their own and just meditate. So this is the kind of outfit that one of these wandering monks would travel with. They would have their bowl for alms, and then this thing's called a krot. You can see it's a kind of combination umbrella and mosquito net. So if they came to sit during the day, they could put that down over them so the mosquitoes couldn't come in, and they'd sleep under it at night so the mosquitoes wouldn't come in. And then the next day, they'd pick up and go to some village, could be a walk away, to get their alms food for the day. So that was their life. It really goes back to the time of the Buddha. Just as a bird, wherever it goes, flies with only its wings, so the bhikkhu goes everywhere with just robes and a bowl. That was their lifestyle. So this is a little bit long, but I'm going to read it from Kamalati Vanich. She's an academic who has studied the Thai forest tradition and a wonderful book on Ajahn Mun and his disciples. Why Tudong? Tudong monks valued wandering as an ascetic practice, as a means of training the mind to face hardship in the unpredictable. Whenever they wandered far from the relative comfort and security of the monastic life, they had to contend with fear, pain, fatigue, hunger, frustration, and distress, and sometimes they risked death. A monk never knew where he would spend the night, where the next meal would come from, or what difficulties he would encounter. He learned to live with insecurities and discomforts, life's inevitable dukkha. This was the lifestyle. When Thai forest monks come to a place like Spirit Rock, they think it's kind of luxurious. I've had teachers tell me, too luxurious here. There needs to be more physical dukkha. There needs to be more contact with the uncertainty of nature. So within the Thai forest tradition, there's a very strong connection to an appreciation of nature. This is from Mahakassapa, who was kind of the most ascetic student in the time of the Buddha. If you read the discourses, he's a tough cookie. But he loved dwelling in remote places, like towering peaks of dark blue clouds, like splendid palaces are these rocks, where the birds' sweet voices fill the air. These rocky crags do please me so. This is from one of the hardcore in the Buddhist time. And there is this tradition of learning from nature. Ajahn Buddhadasa used to often say, let nature be your teacher. But living out in nature, in the forest at his place, you couldn't help but notice impermanence and change. Nature's always changing. Things are born and they die all the time. Ajahn Mun. After ordination, my Ajahn took me wandering in the forests and on the mountains. I learned the Dhamma from the trees, the grass, rivers, streams, caves, and rocks. I listened to the sounds of birds and other animals. By making our meditation centers so comfortable, we have lost touch to some extent with this kind of living close to nature and the lessons that we can learn from it. So some teachers are starting to offer things called nature retreats. So Mark Coleman offers these, Susie Harrington offers these. I don't know if Gil is yet or not, but it's taking people out in nature and doing a whole retreat with a sit-walk schedule in the middle of a campsite, or start from a campsite and then spread out from there. To bring back alive this opportunity to learn from nature can be really powerful. In Thailand, they're doing a lot of logging, as they are all over, for the profit of the timber companies. And some of the monks were very distressed at having the old growth forests be decimated. So they thought, well, even Thai loggers have respect for the monks. So they ordained these trees, and they clothed them in the orange robes that the monks wear. And when the loggers came near, they were hesitant to cut them. So, Dharma ecology. So some of the key figures in the Thai forest tradition, Ajahn Chah, most notable. Met Ajahn Mun in 1946. And then he wandered in the forest for 7 years in the northeast of Thailand. Can you imagine what that would do to your meditation practice? So, some people thought that he was an arhat, but he would never comment on that. But I don't think anybody saw him in defilement. So he had a good reputation. And then after that wandering, he established Wat Ba Pong in the northeast of Thailand in 1954. Very charismatic. I don't know if he could read minds, but he was a very astute judge of people. and he gave his meditation instructions based on what he read as their personalities. So he was a very, very effective teacher to the people who practiced with him. 300 branch monasteries today from his charisma, basically, his teachings and his charisma. He looks like just one of those happy guys, but in his day he was strict. Wake at 3 a.m., Dhamma talk till 10 or 11 at night. When Ajahn Sumedho was practicing with him in Thailand, he said that Ajahn Chah could tell when he was getting restless. So Ajahn Chah would be sitting there. He hadn't been in robes many, many years, and he'd be getting sore. 10 or 11 o'clock at night, still sitting, listening to the Dhamma talk from Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah could tell he wanted the Dhamma talk to end. So he just kept going. Sometimes till 1 in the morning. And finally, when Sumedho would give up, Ajahn Chah would say, okay, that's enough. Stop the Dhamma talk. And then they'd be up at 3 the next morning. He put a strong emphasis on the monk's discipline, Vinaya, because he said it really forces the monks or the nuns to pay attention with mindfulness moment after moment. He didn't see it as an empty legal code. He saw it as something that cultivated moment-to-moment mindfulness throughout the day with every action. And he saw physical discomfort as a key part of the teaching because that was what let people let go. It forced people to let go, to surrender. Surrender and letting go were really central to Ajahn Chah's teachings. So this is a photo from 1970 at Wat Pah Pong. Ajahn Chah is seated. Ajahn Sumedho is right behind him. And then Jack Cornfield is to Ajahn Sumedho's left. They looked pretty skinny back then, didn't they? Yeah, they weren't eating a lot. So Ajahn Sumedho does transmit the happy vibe, kind of big time. He was the first abbot of Wat Pananachat, which is a monastery exclusively for Westerners in Thailand. It's close to Ajahn Chah's original monastery, but it's for Westerners. He was the first abbot there. It's brought a lot of Westerners into the Thai forest tradition. And then Ajahn Chah asked him to go to England and establish a monastery there. So in 1977, he went to England. In 1979, he founded Chithurst, which became their training monastery. Small monastery, usually about 25 monks there, became a training monastery for monks. And he was the abbot for quite a while until he founded Amaravati in 1985. That's the big monastery now in England. It's probably about an hour outside of London, and it's a big establishment. It's got a lay retreat center as well as a big temple and accommodations for probably 40 to 50 monastics there. Ajahn Sumedho used to teach every year at IMS until his abbot duties got too burdensome and he stopped coming. And as he's aged, he's teaching less and less in England. But he has a lot of YouTubes, so you can get his message on YouTube. Key Western teachers in this lineage, Ajahn Basano used to be the abbot of Abhayagiri. He stepped down from that and has passed that on to someone else. Ajahn Amaro is the current abbot at Amaravati in England, wonderful teacher. All these people are wonderful teachers. Ajahn Suchita was the abbot of Chithurst for 25 years. And then you may know of these two nuns, Ayananda Bodhi and Aya Santachita, founded a women's nunnery here in California. Unfortunately, got hit by a fire a few years ago, and so that's not functioning. And Ayamedanandi in Canada, and all three of them are bhikkhunis. And this is a recent innovation. You know, the bhikkhuni order died out in Theravadan countries a long time ago. And so some lineages say we can't have bhikkhunis today because the order died out and you need a bhikkhuni to create a bhikkhuni. But Venerable Analayo believes that it's quite legitimate to borrow another system's Vinaya and create bhikkhunis in the Theravadan lineage. So more and more bhikkhunis are choosing that route as opposed to being just partial precept nuns. So we used to have monastic retreats by monks and by nuns regularly at IMS, and they used to occur also at Spirit Rock, and I think it's really important. I think it's really helpful for us as lay people to come in contact with monastic communities, because we see, what's possible when your life is 100% devoted to Dhamma, just to Dhamma. I think many of the monks and nuns are just wonderful examples that we can learn from. I like this line from one of the chants: "To the Buddha I dedicate this body and mind." And to me, the monastics are the ones who really do live that, in a really beautiful way. Also, the monastics bring devotional elements that we've sort of cut out of the Western Dharma scenes. There's chanting, there's bowing, there's flowers. There used to be incense before chemical sensitivity. So they literally say, we're doing puja now. We're doing worship now. Some people strongly resonate with this. I like this element if it doesn't go on too long. But it's not one of the elements we brought into the West because most Westerners aren't comfortable with it. They might be recovering from too much devotion in their Christian upbringing, or they might just be in a secular frame of mind where all this chanting, bowing stuff just doesn't make sense. But it really suits some temperaments. And so that's one reason I like dipping into the monastic retreats, because we get to experience that, and it really connects for some people. We normally drew from the Ajahn Chah lineage for our monastic retreats because they bring a sense of community. That's the heart of the Ajahn Chah monastic system and all the ones that follow. It's the community. So it's the group of monks and the group of nuns that form in those monasteries that are important. And when they would come and give a retreat, they would bring enough people from those monasteries. You got the living sense of the community and the mutual respect and relationship and the cleanness of the relationships among the monastics. And it's very interesting to note, Mahasi Sayadaw established retreat centers. His mode was silent, intensive vipassana practice. Ajahn Chah established monasteries. His form was community life, with a lot of meditation and the Vinaya, the discipline, that harmonized the relations among all the people there. So I find it very powerful to be in the presence of a monastic community like the ones at Amaravati and Abhayagiri. It really expresses something that as lay people, we don't get to enjoy. I mean, it's a pain also, right? Living with the same people year after year. But you're immersed in Dhamma and Sangha. The refuge in Dhamma, the refuge in Sangha is ever present. It's not something you dip in and out of. So for every year at IMS, and this is mostly true at Spirit Rock too, we would alternate between monks and nuns. And then the monks started dropping off, aging out. So Ajahn Sumedho, Ajahn Amaro, Ajahn Sucitto, they just don't come anymore to IMS and Spirit Rock. The nuns are younger and they're still coming. Ayananda Bodhi, Ayasantacita, they're still coming. But I've been looking for years for someone to take the place of the ones who used to come a lot, and I have 2 candidates now. I don't know if you've come across the Clear Mountain Monastery project in Seattle. There are 2 younger monks who I think are quite wonderful, Ajahn Kovilo and Ajahn Nisabo, and they're gathering funds and planning to buy land to create a monastery there, and I think they'll do it because their Dhamma is very good. So we've just invited them to come to IMS. 2028 is the first opening, but we hope to have them leading a retreat in 2020. That's how far teachers have to plan their schedules. It's just the reality. Hey? Yeah. So keep an eye on that space. And there are also, former monastics who are now lay teachers, Tanisra and Kittisaro, who founded a center in South Africa years ago, now teaching in the West. Jaya Rudgard teaches at the 3-month at IMS. Akinchino teaches in Europe and sometimes at IMS. He was 20 years a monk in the Ajahn Chah system, started visiting with a woman who came to the monastery. I think they had 6 meetings he left the robes and married her after 6 meetings. That's a plunge, huh? So now he's been married for 20 years.
There is a comment
Yes.
online. It's Ajahn Sumedho still teaches almost every week from Amaravati, and they are available online if you check the Amaravati website.
Yes. He's still teaching in a lot of YouTubes, just not teaching retreats any longer. So Ajahn Buddhadasa, this was my teacher in Thailand. I stayed at Wat Suan Mok with him. Interesting person because he's both a scholar and a meditation master. He loved the discourses. He loved to read the Pali and make his own interpretations of them. He taught on dependent origination a lot. He has a book on dependent origination. One of the few Theravadins who really took up the theme of emptiness, a book called Heartwood of the Bodhi Tree. And he was a very original thinker. He wasn't afraid to be different. There are no Buddha statues in that Wat, which is really unusual. I mean, we're pretty secular, but even we will have Buddha statues, right? No Buddha statues. Where a Buddha statue would have been, there was a place where the monks gathered outdoors, sit in a semicircle. He had 3 rocks. He had a big rock, and on top of that he had a smaller rock, and on top of that he had a small rock. And that created sort of an evoking a body sitting. But there was no face, no expression. 3 rocks symbolizing sitting. But he had a tanka. He had this room in the Wat called a spiritual theater. And in the spiritual theater, he reproduced a bunch of artworks from the Zen and Tibetan traditions. It was very far out. Most Theravadan monks aren't interested at all in Japanese or Chinese art or Tibetan art. Ajahn Buddhadasa had a very wide open mind. So do you know the tanka that's the wheel of life that illustrates the links of dependent origination? He had one of those in the spiritual theater, and that was the first place I saw that tanka. Ajahn Buddhadasa brought it. Very open mind, respected all Buddhist traditions. I believe that he translated Huang Po from the Chinese into Thai and then shared that with Ajahn Buddhadasa. Huang Po was an ancient classical master in the Chan tradition. Wonderful teachings. Shared that with Ajahn Chah. So this was during the Rains Retreat of 1982. I'm on the far side. Ajahn Buddhadasa is sitting. I'm on the far side. Next is Rodney Smith, whom you may know or know of. And then a German monk, and then old friend Gary Buck, who was on staff at IMS with me, a Dutch novice, and then Carol Wilson is in the foreground. So the 4 of us were on staff together at IMS 1978-79, and we all ended up at Wat Suan Mok in 1982 together, getting teachings from Ajahn Buddhadasa. This is a typical forest dwelling. I just thought I'd give you a sense of what it means to live in the forest, in these Thai monasteries. This was the one I lived in. This was obviously taken after I'd disrobed. But it's just surrounded by forest, and it's about an acre per dwelling. So my nearest neighbor was kind of in the next acre over, and I heard very little of them. Sometimes at night I'd hear a bang, bang, bang of a wooden stick against the tin roof, and that meant that a snake had dropped on the roof, and my friend was trying to bang it away so it wouldn't creep in under the eaves and invade his kuti. Well, that was life in the forest. I got stung by a scorpion. I got stung by a centipede. There were little deer that ran across the clearing in front of my house and monkeys that swung through the vines overhead. So it was a beautiful experience, simple. The food wasn't great, but the experience was wonderful. Ajahn Mahabua, very interesting and powerful teacher, disciple of Ajahn Mun, and he describes his experience of full enlightenment in this book called Straight from the Heart. It's the first time I've heard a teacher describe that. Some women also in the Thai forest scene, Upasika Ki, a wonderful book called Pure and Simple. These are all on the reading list, so you can look them up on the reading list. Oh, other Thai forest teachers, Ajahn Jumnian, used to come to Spirit Rock, not traveling anymore. Ajahn Panyananda has passed away. He was a good friend of Ajahn Buddhadasa. Ajahn Phuong was the teacher of Thanissaro Bhikkhu. Ajahn Phuong was a student of Ajahn Lee, who was a student of Ajahn Mun. So that's the lineage, Ajahn Mun, Ajahn Lee, to Thanissaro Bhikkhu, puts him in that Thai forest tradition. This is my ordination with Ajahn Panyananda in Thailand. Teaching style, not heavy on meditation technique. The most I've ever really heard from them is using the term Buddho with the breath. Breathing in, you say Bud, breathing out, you say Do. If you do that regularly, it does develop good concentration. But that's about it. They often point to awareness. Ajahn Chah called this original mind. Ajahn Sumedho called it intuitive awareness. Ajahn Jumnian said awareness was the deathless. It has a very broad view about practice. It's not as goal-oriented as the Mahasi Sayadaw style with the progress of insight. Very open. I asked a Thai Ajahn, actually an American Ajahn in the Ajahn Chah lineage recently, how do you gauge meditation practice development? He said, what we look for is contentment and gratitude, not goal-oriented. So, monastic form, you get deep in monastic form. Sitting hours every day, day after day, month after month, year after year, you get deep. Now, how this translates to lay life, I'm not sure. It's very well suited to monastic life. Lay life, not sure. Okay, I think we're going to wrap there because it's 12 o'clock. So,